Wow. I feel like such a letdown after that. That is impressive, and I am not. Hey, I want to take care of a couple of housekeeping issues, and this is not even my house, but I want to take care of them, if that's okay. I am not typically here on a regular Sunday, okay? My name's Jason, and I love Suncoast, but here's the good news, especially if you are either new to Suncoast Church, or if you are new to church in general, by the way. If this is kind of your first time back to church in a long time, or first time in church ever, good news is this: the guy that is typically up here on a Sunday will be back next Sunday. So if you don't like today, good news is you don't have to wait much longer. You can come back next week and you'll like next Sunday. It'll be awesome. If you're like, hey, I'm not even sure about that guy. He's got a weird mixed up accent. I'm not sure where he's from, whether he's from the States or Australia. I honestly am not sure where I'm from either. I feel like I'm from both countries. But at the end of the day, if today isn't your favorite Sunday, come back next Sunday. It'll be your favorite. I guarantee it, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to clarify, a bit of housekeeping, is Stephen was very kind, very, very kind in his introduction. And I want to clarify something. When they tell you that a person is highly qualified to speak on a subject, like this particular series we're in part 2 today, by the way, of this series called The Castle. So if you missed last Sunday, especially if you missed last Sunday, Jono did an incredible job, the guy that's here on a regular basis, of setting up the whole premise of this series. Make sure you go to Suncoast YouTube channel, just search The Castle, and you'll find the first part immediately. Watch it because it helps set up the whole series, okay? But when they say that this person is uniquely qualified to talk about a specific subject, here's what they are actually saying. When it comes to this subject of the inner life, which is kind of what we're talking about in this series, it simply means that the person, if they're uniquely qualified to talk about it, it means they've had to spend a lot of time on that because their inner life is incredibly jacked up, okay? So that's the reality. That's the reality. Honestly, my soul or my inner life, that's kind of how I describe it, was so incredibly jacked up for so long, even after following Jesus for decades, that about 5-6 years ago, I discovered, man, if I don't learn how to tend to the garden of my inner life, that's kind of my working definition of soul care, then my external life is going to be a train wreck. And it was. So when they say, hey, this person's uniquely qualified, that is code for this person has got a really jacked up whatever it is they're speaking on, and that's why they're uniquely qualified. The last thing in the housekeeping world, for those of you that are watching online, we're about to play a game. You can play along with us. It might be odd if you're watching from a cafe or you're sitting on an airplane after the fact, because I'm going to invite everyone that's able to stand in just a moment. But here's what you need to know. I don't want you to miss this. Don't miss this. I am here today not because I have figured out what caring for your inner life looks like or how to follow Jesus looks like, but I am simply a person on the journey, and I'm wanting to just share what I'm learning with you right now in my life. So I have not figured it out. I have not arrived. In fact, that's one of the challenges of when they invite a guest to come to a place and they strap one of these things on their face and they ask them to stand up on one of these things. Here's unfortunately what oftentimes happens. People out there think way more highly of the person up here than they really should. And the bottom line is I'm just another person who gets up every morning trying to figure out what does it look like to follow this man named Jesus who has literally transformed my life. And I'm so grateful. And I hope that today might be a little bit of a help for you taking a next step on that journey as well. So that was the housekeeping I needed to take care of. Now I'd like to dive into a fun little game. Would you bear with me this morning? I spent 4 years studying to be a PE teacher. So I have a 4-year degree in whistleblowing, and I am good at it. I'm really good at blowing a whistle, okay? But I still love playing games. So do me a favor, if you're able, and if you're watching online, you should join in as well. It'd be fun to see you standing in a cafe watching online. It would be super fun. Would you stand with me? We're going to play a game called Face Off, okay? Now, Face Off is a very simple game. And there's going to be a warm-up round. There's several rounds. We're going to do a warm-up round so you can kind of get used to the game. This face-off game this morning, this is the speed edition, okay, of the game. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up on the screen my friend Will. By the way, give it up for Will up the back. Will, let's be honest, Will and guys like Nathaniel, who are running like the whole sound thing, they make us look way better than we really are up here, okay? They make us look very good. Up on the screen is an image, okay? And there's a couple of images there, and I want you to decide which of these you think is the fastest, okay? By standing in the direction of the image you think is faster. So, really simple. If you think the cheetah runs faster, you're going to face that direction. If you think that it's the antelope that runs faster, you're going to face that direction, okay? And you're going to have about 3 seconds to make the decision, because then we're going to bring up the answer. Now, this is just a warm-up round, okay? I like to refer to this as the grace round, okay? But unlike Jesus' grace, it's over after the first round. That's a bad church joke, okay? If you're not a church person, I apologize. That's a horrible joke. But the reality is, after this round, if you don't get the answer right, you will be eliminated, okay? You'll have to sit down. It's not a game for every generation. There are some generations that believe everyone gets a prize. Hey, whoa. Before you start laughing, you may be that generation, okay? Don't start laughing too quickly. But that's not this game. In fact, there's hopefully only going to be one person that gets this incredible prize. I have spared little to no expense on the prize, but these are incredible snakes, okay? So, first question, which is faster, cheetah or antelope? You got 3 seconds. Face the direction you think is faster. 3, 2, if you're still facing me, you'll be eliminated after this round. 1, Will gives us the answer. It is the cheetah, okay? Now, come on, that was a gimme. That's why it was the grace round, okay? Now we're going to up the ante a little bit. All right, Will, let's go to the next slide. Who is faster? This could be tricky. Bolt or Blake? Okay, who's faster? Bolt or fastest man on the planet, recorded speed. Is it Bolt or Blake? All right, you got 3, 2, 1. The answer is Bolt. Okay. If you were facing this direction of Blake, you now are eliminated. You'll need to be seated, including the man on the front row that was trying to get deep into the question. He was asking questions about the question, okay? That's a total Jesus move. He gets asked a question, I'll up you a question. All right, here we go. Next one. Fastest car on the planet as of 2023, okay? Just this year, fastest car on the planet. I'm not even going to try and pronounce them. You've got 3 seconds to decide. We got to move quickly. 3, 2, if you're still facing me, you'll be eliminated. 1, the answer is... Now, some of you chose the color because you thought red is always faster, okay? Not always the case. We still got a lot of people in the game. This is good. All right, next question. We're in a series called The Castle. Castles take a long time to build, like centuries, some of them, not just years. Like my wife and I, we built a castle, by the way, when Jono said, I want you to come and preach for us, part 2 of a series called The Castle. My immediate response was, oh, I love the vibe of it. It's just the vibe. It's amazing. It's such a good title. Now, my wife and I we built a castle, small one, over COVID. It took almost 2 years to complete the tiny little castle, all right? But real castles take decades, sometimes centuries to build. Which of these 2 castles, the one on the left, by the way, is the one that Disney kind of have copied for the Cinderella castle. The other one on the right, I got to visit this when I was like a 16-year-old kid. It was super fun. Which do you think was built faster? The Berg, this way, or this other one that I'm not even going to try to pronounce because all of the Germans in the room will say you are woeful at German. All right? Was it this way or that way? All right? 3, 2, 1. The answer is it was the Disney one. And everybody else had to be seated. Okay. Last question, all right? Still got quite a few people in the crowd standing. This is good. Last question. One of my favorite films of all time is the original movie, we'll bring it up on screen, Top Gun. And in the movie, there was an incredible line, I feel the need the need for speed. Who said that line in the movie? Was it Maverick or was it Goose? Maverick or Goose? I feel the need for speed, all right? Face this way if you think it was Goose. Face this way if you think it was Maverick, all right? If you're still facing me, you'll be eliminated, all right? And the answer is, they both said it. Now, somebody over here said that they thought they both said it, and Dave, I think they deserve a bag of snakes. If you thought that they both said it, then you get to win the prize. That's actually just my way of ending the game quickly by eliminating everyone from the game. Here's the reality. I Googled for that game, like fastest things on the planet, and you wouldn't believe the amount of things that came back in that search. It was unbelievable, the amount of websites that track fastest things on the planet. Here's what's crazy. You Google what's the slowest thing on the planet, there is very little that comes back in your search results. Here's the reason why. We live in a world that loves and celebrates and actually rewards speed. Think about it. From your earliest days, maybe in a classroom, remember your teacher saying, hey, the first person that gets done with this fill in the blank gets to go and fill in the blank. Grab something from their lolly jar, or maybe gets to go to recess, or gets to go to lunch first. From our earliest ages, even when it came to carnivals, I remember swimming carnivals and athletic carnivals, nobody ever got ribbons for coming in last. Maybe you did. Maybe you're part of a generation that's now giving out ribbons all the time. But my generation, there was like the first 3 people would get a ribbon. And honestly, if you were first or second, you might get invited to the next round of carnivals at states or regionals, districts, whatever it was. But we live in a culture and a society that celebrates. They love it. We're addicted to, we celebrate, and we reward speed. Here's what happens. You know the old adage, what gets rewarded gets repeated. And all through our lives, we begin to develop this insatiable desire for efficiency and speed. And this is a really big problem in our culture today, especially when it comes to this idea that we're talking about in this series of how do we care for our inner life when externally all of the pressures of our culture and society are all around efficiency and speed. We've got to figure out, what do we do with this issue that develops in us because our society rewards something, and because of that, we end up repeating it. In fact, there's a whole bunch of studies now in the psychology and medical world that talks about this issue and has described this new phenomenon that has been created in our culture today called artificial urgency. Here's kind of my working definition of artificial urgency. It's the art of making something that isn't urgent, urgent. So when I was in primary school, I couldn't wait to get into high school. When I was in high school, I couldn't wait to get my license. When I was in high school, I couldn't wait to graduate from high school so that I could get to uni. And when I finally got to uni, I couldn't wait to get a real job and earn real money so that I could then get married, because I couldn't wait to get married, because God forbid that I turn 30 and still be single. Are you kidding? It's like a death sentence. And then I got married, and I couldn't wait to have children. And then when I had my children, I couldn't wait for them to finally go off to school. My wife and I talked about it. We couldn't wait for them to go to school. And now my youngest son, Miles, is about to graduate from high school. You know what I can't wait for? No more school fees. I'm so excited. 2 months from now, no more school fees. And I thought about putting them away for retirement and my kids' inheritance, and I said, forget it, we're going on holidays every year. Every year, we're putting them towards holidays. And now my kids, almost all of them are out of the house. My wife and I have said, we love our children, but man, when they are all out of the house, it's going to be some fun days. And then I've got one daughter who's actually here with me this morning. It's so fun to have Olivia and her fiance, Jack. They live here on the sunny coast, and I can't wait for them to get married, because after they get married, we can't wait, my wife and I, no pressure by the way, but we can't wait to be grandparents. How cool is that? Because then I'll start probably paying private school fees for my grandkids again, you know? We'll just recycle it all. That's not a promise, by the way. But we create this artificial urgency in our lives. And the cultural consensus that comes out of all of this craziness, ultimately we say this, that bigger is better and going further faster is a better thing. In fact, I couldn't believe it. I was listening the other day, I was watching TV, I was listening to a commercial for a car, and I loved the first part of the commercial. It said that inner peace, and they were showing a picture of a family on a beach, just having fun together, kicking a ball around. They said, inner peace is the new luxury. And then it switched from that straight to a really fast luxury sedan. I was like, oh, you almost had it. You almost had it. But then because of our culture today, we think, oh, if I can get there further and I can go faster and if I can get bigger and better, then everything's going to be great. But here's what a lot of psychologists, a lot of medical professions are now describing is an issue within our culture because of this societal pressure of bigger is better and going further faster is the key to success. Because of that, they have now coined, it's almost a medical term, of something they call hurry sickness that is affecting people all across the planet. By the way, if this is your first time in church, and you think, oh, this is kind of a shot at the culture today, just so you know, there is no difference between church people and people that don't typically go to church. We all struggle with this same issue of hurry sickness. This is something that's a part of our culture today. And they're saying some of the symptoms of this, or some of the things that are coming from this, is that there's increased anxiety in our world because of hurry sickness. There's decreased focus, increased anger, and then increased debt. There was a long list as I was doing research around hurry sickness, list far too long for this slide today. But the reality is, we're struggling in our world because of this external pressure that speed and efficiency equals success. We're experiencing this thing called hurry sickness. So as Jono said to me, Jason, we're doing this series called The Castle, where we can look at the mess out there and figure out how do we protect our lives, our inner lives, from what's going on externally. I thought, my goodness, this is something we've got to talk about. Now, if you're wondering if you are a part of the community that struggles with hurry sickness, this is like group therapy this morning, by the way. It's not even 10 o'clock and we're already talking about this stuff. This is good times. If you're wondering if you struggle with hurry sickness, I thought it would be good to put together a little survey this morning for you to just reflect on. So I'm going to have Will bring that up on the screen. Here are some questions to ask yourself if you struggle with hurry sickness. Number one, is everything a race for you? Like when you pull up at a set of lights, are you like me? And you're thinking to yourself, oh, I wonder if that is a quicker lane. Oh, there's only 2 in that lane. There's 3. Is multitasking your MO? Do delays trigger you? Full disclosure, this morning, we're driving up from North Lakes up here. My wife got on the Bruce Highway, as we typically do, heading into Brisbane. And I was like, oh no, this is not good, because we are now headed over the river before we can do a U-turn and come back up. And immediately I was triggered. I was like, oh, this is going to add time to our trip. You always feel like you're behind? Do you tend to interrupt or talk over people because they're not moving fast enough in the conversation? How about this last one? Do you get pleasure? Maybe an over-accentuated amount of pleasure from just ticking things off your to-do list. Jono, I love the way he set this up last week. And again, if you haven't seen part 1 of this series, you've got to go back on YouTube. Go to Suncoast YouTube channel and search The Castle. You'll find it. He set up this idea that we're talking about all throughout this series called The Castle. And he said that a castle was designed for primarily 2 purposes. The castle is designed to protect the people both in the castle but also around the castle as well. And it's designed to help that group of people flourish. Now, here's the good news. we are not the first part of society that has struggled with the pressures of hurry sickness. We're not the first ones in human history that have struggled to follow the way of Jesus. For those of you that would call yourself a Jesus follower, to live the Christian life in the midst of a culture and a society that has a lot of pressures pulling on us and pressing in on us. We're not the first group of people that have tried to figure out what this looks like. In fact, in the first century, those that began following Jesus in the first century found it so difficult because of the pressures of the culture and the society at the time. There were a number of them that left the culture. They got away to the deserts of North Africa, and they tried to figure out, what does it look like to follow the way of Jesus apart from the cultural pressures that they were living in at the time. And then in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century, these groups of people, they were called desert mothers and fathers. That was what they referred to them as. Other early Christians, early followers of Jesus, would come from the cities out to the desert to learn from this group of people what it looks like to live a life amidst the pressure of the culture and society that they lived in, but still follow the way of Jesus. They developed what is referred to as a rule of life. They developed kind of this idea, a rhythm of living life amidst all the pressures of the world, all of the things that were pressing in on them, in a way that helped them to live the way of Jesus. And these desert fathers and mothers, they created these rule of life or rhythm of life to help people, to protect them, but to also help them flourish in the way that they lived. Now, one of the things that they noticed about the way of Jesus, this is really important because it kind of is an overarching principle that we're going to look at today that I think is really helpful. Whether you're a follower of Jesus or not makes no difference. This is a helpful principle, a helpful practical way of living, no matter where you find yourself in the journey of faith. Jesus lived a very counter-cultural lifestyle. In fact, I love this. As you look through all of the different biographies that we have available to us of Jesus' life, primarily the 4 Gospels at the beginning of the New Testament of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when you look at those biographies of Jesus' life, you'll notice something. Jesus was never in a hurry, and he was never running to any appointments. If you look through Jesus' life, you'll see a lot of people running to him, but you'll never see Jesus running because he was late for something or he felt like he was going to miss something. And in today's story that I want to share with you from the life of Jesus, I think this story highlights this in a very powerful, powerful way. Now, for some of you, this is a story that may be very familiar to you. If you've been in the church world for a long time, you may have heard this story before, and maybe you've even shared this story with other people. But whether it's familiar to you or not, here's what I want to invite you to do. I'd love for you to just lean in for a moment to this story. I want you, as we read the story, I want you to find a couple of characters. There's lots of characters in the story. And I want you to put yourself in their shoes. And I specifically want to invite you to do something. I want to invite you to try and feel what they were feeling in the story. Put yourself in their shoes and feel the emotion that they were probably feeling in this story. Here's how the story begins. We're going to look at this particular version of it from the Gospel of Mark, which is the second of the biographies that we have available to us on the life of Jesus. And Mark describes the beginning of the story in this way. He says, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, he was on one side of the lake teaching people, and he was doing miracles. And then he got in the boat, went to the other side of the lake. It says a large crowd gathered around him by the lake. Now, Jesus drew large crowds of people wherever he went. He was kind of a celebrity icon in the day, and so he drew large crowds of people. This was not unusual. The story continues that there was a synagogue leader, a leader in the synagogue named Jairus, and he came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, and he pleaded earnestly with Jesus, and he said this, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." Now, we talked a moment ago about artificial urgency. This is not artificial urgency. This is real urgency. This guy's daughter is dying. So listen to the way that Jesus responded. It says this: so Jesus ran as fast as he could, jumped on his chariot with him, and hurried to the daughter's side. Now, some of you are laughing because you know that Jesus never ran. He never jumped on someone's chariot. He never did any of these things. The reality is, with this real urgency, this is how Jesus actually responded. That's Perko's paraphrase, by the way. The real response is this: Jesus simply went with him. In what way did Jesus go with him? Mark continues. It says, so Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. Now, to get the picture of what's happening in this scenario, imagine you are leaving Suncoast Stadium after the state of origin. And you are trying to get out to the train or to the bus. And you're trying to fight your way through the crowd. That's exactly what was happening in this story. Jesus is pressed in with this large crowd of people all around him. And there's a lady that's been there, not just suffering for 12 years, but Mark actually gives us the detail of her suffering. He goes on to say this, that she had been going to doctors and she had spent everything that she had to try and figure out this medical issue she was struggling with. Instead of it getting better, it actually was getting worse. Now, I want to pause here for a second. Some of you have had medical conditions where you've gone from doctor to doctor to doctor for years and decades, and you know what this is like. But some of us have never experienced this. I want you just to lean into what this woman must have been feeling. 12 years spending all she had trying to get to the bottom of this thing. She's exhausted and desperate. And she had heard about Jesus. Mark continues. It says that she had heard about Jesus and she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I could just touch his clothes, even if he doesn't touch me, but if I could touch his clothes, then I will be freed. I'll be healed from what's going on in my body. In that moment, she's actually healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from this suffering. Now, here's the deal. If you're brand new to this whole church thing, you need to know that part of the reason why people before 9:30 on a Sunday morning were singing just a moment at the top of their lungs. Some of them were so excited they had questions about the songs they were singing. Like some of them had a couple of questions. They seem so adamant that they know what they're singing about, and they still have questions. Here's the reason why. Don't miss this. People are getting so excited because they've experienced what this lady has experienced. They've been freed. That's why they're getting excited. She was so excited. And then Jesus' response is crazy. At once, Jesus realized that the power had gone from him, and he turned around in the crowd and he asked, "Who touched my clothes?" Could you imagine turning to your friend as you're leaving the state of origin at Suncorp and asking, "Hey, who touched me? Who bumped me? Somebody bumped me from behind." Jesus, what are you talking about? Everyone's touched you. I'm sure the disciples were saying, "Hey, you see the people crowding against you? And yet you can ask, who touched me?" What kind of a question is that, Jesus? But Jesus kept looking because he knew that somebody had touched him differently. The woman, knowing what had happened, she came and fell at Jesus' feet, and she's terrified. And I know some people, when it comes to God, they are terrified because of their version of who God is. Their version of who they think God is and what he thinks of them, they are scared to death to maybe even come into a building like this. I've heard people say this, "Jason, if I ever came to your church, that thing might actually fall down." That's the kind of fear she had. But Jesus, so kind, he's so gracious. No matter what we think of him or what we think he thinks of us, listen to the way Jesus responds. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Maybe you've got a version of God that you think he is out to get you, and you're terrified and you're nervous around him. Can I just share with you? He loves you. He desperately wants to know you. He desperately wants you to know him. And he wants you to be freed from the suffering, just like he said to this woman, go in peace and be freed from your suffering. The story continues. Now, we forget, there's a guy in the story whose daughter is dying at this point. Don't forget that. When Jesus was still speaking, some of the people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, and said, your daughter is dead. Don't even bother Jesus anymore. She's gone. And then Jesus says something so profound. He says, don't be afraid, just believe. When I read that the other day, I thought to myself, that sounds like something Ted Lasso would say. Don't be afraid, just believe. Sometimes we need to hear that and we can receive it. There are other times, to be honest with you, when somebody says, hey, don't be afraid of that, just believe. That's the last thing I need to hear. But no matter where that sits with you this morning, the truth is still the same. Because he promises he'll never leave us, he'll never forsake us. We don't need to fear, just believe. And then the story goes that he kind of told some of them to come along with him to the person's house. And so they went to the person's house. When they arrived, there were people literally bawling their eyes out and wailing outside of the house. And Jesus asked the question, hey, why is there so much commotion going on inside the house? Why is everyone freaking out? And the obvious, Jesus, because this girl has died. And then Jesus actually said, she's not dead, she's just asleep. And they laughed at him. They literally laughed at Jesus. You're clueless. She's dead, she's not asleep. And then Jesus, it says, he put them all out. Now, I can't wait to ask Jesus one day, what did put them out look like? That sounds very British, very kind of reserved. Hey, would everybody please leave the house? I have a feeling he was probably a little more forceful than that. He put them out of the house. He had a few of them stay with him, Peter, James, and John, and the mother and father of this girl. And then he goes into the girl, grabs her by the hand, and it says, he told her, Talitha cum, which simply means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And then I love this next verse. Mark says, immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. Notice the detail Mark gives us. Look at the little parentheses. She was 12 years old. How long had the woman been suffering that was freed from her suffering? 12 years. Jesus knew all along the timing of when he would arrive and bring this girl back to life, and he knew all along the timing of when he would free this woman from her suffering. I love the way that the great speaker and author, a guy named Mike Todd, he says it this way. I love this. He says that Jesus walks at a pace of grace. That's how Jesus walks. He's not in a hurry. He's not in a rush. And here's the invitation. Those desert fathers and mothers back in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century would tell people that would come from the pressure of the world and the culture around them to try and figure out, how do you follow Jesus with all of this pressure of society telling us bigger is better and going further, faster is a better thing to do? How do you do it? They would simply say this, hey, Jesus has an invitation for us. He invites us to do this. He invites us to walk at a pace where we can both experience and extend God's grace. Jesus' invitation to all of us, whether you're a follower of Jesus yet or not, whether you've been following Jesus for a long period of time, the invitation is the same, to live at a pace where you can both experience first, because we can't give what we don't possess. So I experience his grace first, so I can extend that grace to others. So let me ask you a practical question as we wrap up our time together. Would you just for a moment reflect and ask yourself, in what area of my life do I need to slow down so that I can experience God's grace, or perhaps extend God's grace to another person? What's the area of my life where I need to slow down so I can experience God's grace and be able to extend that grace to other people in my life? If you've never started following Jesus yet, I want to invite you to slow down long enough to experience his grace and love in your life. And maybe you've been following him for a long period of time. I want to invite you to slow down, walk at the pace of grace as Jesus did, so you can both experience his grace and extend his grace. Here's the bottom line. Life is not a race. It's not a race. So live at a slower pace. The pressure of the world says, hey, further, faster is better, bigger is better. But I'm telling you, if you want to have inner peace, if you want to have this relationship with Jesus that is peaceful and contented, then we've got to learn that life is not a race and to live at a slower pace. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you. Thank you for preserving these stories from Jesus' life that invites us to live the way he lived, so that we can both experience God's grace in our life, but then we can extend that grace to other people. God, I pray for those that maybe have never experienced your grace ever in their life. They've never experienced your love in their life. God, I pray they'd slow down long enough to experience that. And for those of us that have been following you for a long period of time, God, I pray that we would fight the pressure of the world and society that says further, faster is better, and to slow down so we can experience and extend your grace. I pray all of this in Jesus' precious name. Amen.